All right. So I want to talk about Formula One. It's been a while since we've had the Formula One season. I'm excited to get back into it. And I was thinking about which drivers I believe are actually the best when it comes to raw driving ability. We all know Formula One is not a spec series, so the cars are not made even and equal. But there are still some stellar drivers and some that stand up above the rest. So I was thinking, who are the drivers that I believe, even in a spec series format, would be at the top? These are the drivers that I think can compete for a world championship in 2021. And for me, it's a short list. I think there are 4 drivers that really stand out as the exceptional drivers right now that have the potential to compete for a championship. And so, first, we have Lewis Hamilton. He's a 7-time world champion. He's got the most wins in F1 history. He's the epitome of consistency. We don't need to say a whole lot more about him. Then you have Max Verstappen, who, in a lesser car with Red Bull, is always considered one of the favorites to win a title when it comes to him versus Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he's F1's youngest race winner. He's got 10 wins to his names, 42 podiums, and he's a contender every year for a good reason. He's shown. And so these 2 drivers are easy locks. I think everyone agrees. These 2 would be able to compete above everybody else. But there are 2 other drivers that I believe right now, if Formula One were a spec series, would be able to compete for titles. And those are Daniel Ricciardo and Charles Leclerc. I think that Ricciardo is a 7-time winner. He had some fantastic performances with both Red Bull and his time at Renault. He's got 7 race wins in his career, and he's finished in the points more often than he hasn't during a Mercedes dominant hybrid era. I also think that Ricciardo brings something to a team that has a lot of value. And in football, for instance, that's called like being a good locker room guy. I think that Ricciardo is a driver who has the skills to back up being on your team, but who also is able to motivate everybody at that organization. He motivates the engineers, the mechanics, the team principal. He motivates everyone to bring their best to the field every weekend. And Charles Leclerc, he's so young, but he's already won 2 races while driving for Ferrari, which has a spotlight on it like no other team in the sport. When you think about it, Ferrari is like the Dallas Cowboys is to the NFL. It's the team that has the most attention on it year in and year out. And he has been able to perform. Well, they've had a couple down years and they've had a lackluster car. He has been able to deliver some phenomenal performances. Like at Sakir in 2020, where he got that Ferrari to P4. That car had no business qualifying at P4. Then I think there's another tier of drivers who are drivers that are good enough in a spec series to compete for race wins regularly, but perhaps not consistently. They need things to kind of go their way, and they can squeeze wins here and there, and I think this list is quite long. I think that there are a lot of very good drivers. So starting here, I think that Sergio Perez has proven, now that he's got a race win under his belt, you have to put him at least in this tier. But he's been a highly competitive driver during his entire career, during his time with Force India, Racing Point, and hopefully he'll continue to do that with Red Bull. I will say I'm not entirely convinced that he is on the same level as the 4 guys I've already listed above, but I hope he's able to add some more wins to his already very solid career. And I think in a spec series, he would still be able to compete. Then I have guys like Lando Norris and George Russell, who are young drivers, and George Russell in particular, he's been held back by a weaker car, so we haven't been able to really see what he can do. but we did see him for a weekend at Sakir, and he showed race-winning speed. He showed overtaking ability. He was able to keep a cool head when things were going not his way, and I think there's a lot of value in that. And for Lando, he doesn't have any race wins yet, but he's scored points the majority of his races. He's still an incredibly young driver, and I don't think he's hit his ceiling at all yet, but I'm not entirely sure that Lando in 2021 would be able to consistently vie for a title shot, but I do believe he could win some races. Then some other guys I have, Sebastian Vettel, third most race wins, I believe. He might not be the same driver he was with Red Bull, but early in his time with Ferrari, he was still giving the Mercedes a run for their money, and I believe he can bounce back in 2021, and even in a Spec Series format, I think he would still compete for race wins, but I have to see him gain a bit more confidence. I feel like he's lacking that a bit at the end of his time with Ferrari, and I hope to see him bounce back there. And then I have guys like Pierre Gasly, who's already won a race. I have Valtteri Bottas, who has won races, but he hasn't shown the ability to compete with Lewis in the same best car on the grid, so I don't think he's a real title contender. And Carlos Sainz, another guy who I have high hopes for. I don't think he's hit his ceiling yet, but I haven't seen enough from him to really put him in that next tier quite yet. And finally, to wrap things up, I have the drivers who I'm not entirely sure would be competing even in a Spec Series. I will say I'm including people who have been out of the sport or who haven't competed before, so rookies are in this category. I just haven't seen enough. I haven't seen any of them at this level yet. And Fernando Alonso, who's been out of the sport for a couple of years, I don't know how prepared he is as a Formula One driver yet, so I don't feel comfortable. I would probably be okay with putting him in the race winner. I'm not entirely sure I feel he could compete for titles yet, but that knocks 4 guys out. And then I have guys like Esteban Ocon, who had to take a year off from Formula One, came back, had a rough year, but had some flashes towards the end of the season where he got P2 and a couple strong performances. To be fair to him, his teammate was Daniel Ricciardo. That's a tough driver to be paired up with, but I'm not entirely sure he could compete for race wins. I'm not sure if his head is in the right space to really compete. I have guys like Lance Stroll, who has had flashes of greatness, like qualifying P1 at Istanbul, but he wasn't able to keep it there. He really struggled against Sergio Perez, who is without a doubt a great driver, but I just haven't seen enough. I'm still waiting to see Lance take that next step forward to really compete with the big dogs in the sport. Then Antonio Giovinazzi and Nicholas Latifi, both of these guys I just feel haven't shown enough. Admittedly, they aren't in the best cars, so I think you can't hold that against them too much, but for at least Nicholas Latifi, he hasn't outqualified George Russell yet, and Antonio Giovinazzi and Kimi I both also have in this tier. I think Kimi's just a little bit too old, and I am judging drivers based on their 2021 abilities as far as my speculation goes. So Prime Kimi, absolutely title contender. 2021, I'm not so sure. And so that about sums up my list. So for the title contenders, I have 4 guys: Hamilton, Verstappen, Ricciardo, and Leclerc. The drivers that I believe are talented enough to win races are Perez, Norris, Russell, Sainz, Gasly, and Vettel. And the ones that I'm not so sure about are Stroll, Alonso, Ocon, Raikkonen, Giovinazzi, and Latifi. And then the 3 rookie drivers, Schumacher, Mazepin, and Tsunoda. So that about sums up my list of my ranking on the drivers based on ability if they were in a Spec Series for the 2021 Formula One season. Do you guys agree? Do you disagree? Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed, leave a like, be sure to subscribe, and if you have anything else that you think would be interesting to talk about or hear me talk about, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.